Hello.
Hi,
How are you, Shatara?
I'm all right. How are you?
Well, I'm managing as best I can in the midst of a ridiculously awful pandemic and this lockdown. I have it better than most, I'm sure, but doesn't mean it's not unpleasant and long and lonely. I'm sure it's the same for you and everybody else out there.
Yeah,
But here we are talking about art, and hopefully that sustains us, right?
that's the goal.
So I'm James Gray, and that's Shatara Michelle Ford. And hello, and we're here talking about Shatara's wonderful debut movie, which is called Test Pattern. And I've known Shatara for a long time. How long? 10 years?
Like, I think 6 years.
6 years? I don't know. The lockdown's making all time mean nothing. I don't know what's happening. And how did we meet? I actually don't know the answer to this. I don't remember. It's not that I don't know the answers. I don't remember. Was it Allie? It was it might have been my
Yeah,
wife that introduced us.
yeah. I was she was interviewing me at Le Pain Quotidien on Larchmont, and you happened to be there. So then you, as you were leaving, stopped and said hello, made some, wisecrack and kept going. And I thought, okay, I can work
Well,
for
it's very good news that I had you tell everybody how we met because, of course, as usual, I have no recollection of that moment whatsoever. But anyway, uh, I've known you for a little while, that's for sure, and seen you grow as an artist, and now you've made this movie, and we're here to talk about that and talk about your ambitions for it and your dreams for it, and basically anything else you want to discuss. But I thought we would start by I wanted to bring up this sort of the point of view of the movie
it.
and how you, for example, the sort of formal way that sometimes you'll have planes in and out of focus that are not exactly typical. Like something will be held out of focus for a while. And the foreground will be atypically out of focus or in focus, not what we expect. And it does affect how we view the world. Was this part of the? I mean, obviously it was intentional that stuff, but can you talk a little bit about how you approached the presentation of point of view in this film? It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think I think I've been trying to find a way to kind of distill what it feels like for me to be a Black person in America. And I think that everything just feels I mean, I'm alienated constantly, and I feel like everything is off, and I feel like I experience everything in just kind of this, like, I don't know, there's always like a step removed, or something's kind of, you know, buzzing in the background, or the colors are kind of washed. Something's always off. And so I was trying to express that the best way that I could, especially for someone, who I think is not necessarily in a, I don't know. I lived in Austin for a while. I spent time in Texas. Like, I don't think for an average Black person, or any person with a dark skin tone, being there feels very welcoming all the time. And I think that you are constantly, you know, always looking over your shoulder, or kind of on edge at some point. And so that was the kind of idea, that was the kind of thing that I was trying to express by doing that.
Well, I was going to ask you about Austin and why Austin, and was that always part of the calculus, or what? Was there a practical issue with why you decided to shoot there, or was there a sort of real a point that you were trying to get at with those specific? Because it has a specific sense of place. It really does.
Yeah, I think it's some and some. I think that I knew, like, look, I knew I was going to be making this movie on my own, and that I was going to have to be really grafting. And it's quite hard to make any kind of, in my opinion, any kind of independent film of scale in Los Angeles. It's just expensive, and it's really busy, and you're always competing for space. and people's time. And so, and Austin's a very filmmaker friendly city. So already I thought that it might be an easier job for me if I went down there than tried to attempt it in Los Angeles. And then there's like other like more practical things. Like with all of my work, I'm kind of having a conversation about policy, just like the policies that govern us, and structures and systems. And a place like Texas, with the types of policies that they churn out, where it relates to female bodily autonomy, sexual health, sexual reproductive choice. I was looking for a state that already kind of gave you the conditions where if something like this were to happen, it'd be really complicated to navigate. And then add, racial hostility on top of that, like, how it's not, it wouldn't be the same movie if it were set in Los Angeles or anywhere in California, really.
Oh, I
And
totally understand.
yeah, I grew up in Missouri, and I was looking for a energy, a conditioning that felt similar to what I might have experienced growing up.
Mm. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And it's very interesting because the film is not what you're talking about with point of view. It's there. It's not heavy-handed about issues of ethnicity, or it's not. It's actually in some ways it's more pointedly uh, approaching gender than it is actually issues of ethnicity or race. Which is not to say it's not there. It's
Yeah,
always there, but it's not. The film is not, preaching some position on that. But with gender, I felt it a bit more pointedly, and
yeah,
how uh, that point of view informed how she views the men in her life, who seem, by the way, even in their most benign state, utterly frightening.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Uh, I'm glad that's
But
correct. I don't know, but what I will tell you is that that's not too common. It's very easy to, particularly now. When forgive me, but when did you actually shoot?
I shot in April of 2018.
April 2018. So obviously pre George
Mm-hmm.
Floyd, pre all that. So, but it's still. I wonder if you could talk to or speak to this idea of gender and how the state actually does affect her view of herself in a weird way.
Yeah,
You almost get the sense that the state's reaction to her situation, which I'm not going to tell the viewers if they haven't seen it yet, um, it has a direct impact on her identity. I
yeah,
wonder if you might speak to that.
yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to point out is, um, I I don't know. I wanted to explore this in the first movie I made because I was having an experience after, I don't know, the first few years of properly being an adult, and I don't know, reflecting on I don't know, my feminist learnings. And I think this is the moment, like in general, like we were all kind of talking about um women's bodily autonomy and just like, virtual humanity in general, in 2016, 2017, for very obvious political or reasons that were brought up by our political landscape at the time. But I started watching a whole bunch of movies again and experiencing them differently, especially Hitchcock movies. Like every kind of female major character, I felt like was under some extreme terror, or like it just sucked. Like Hitchcock movies are thrilling and terrifying anyway, most of them. But I was reliving it in a very different way because I'm a woman and I was very much identifying with the women and being like, God, this sucks. I remember like watching Strangers on a Train and, thinking about the kind of estranged wife that they were trying to get rid of. And I felt for her. I was terrified only because of her experience more than anything else. So yeah, I don't know. Because of that, I started kind of like wanting to focus in on like what makes just existing as a marginalized person, as a non-white, non-male person, what does that feel like? And as I kind of reflected on, again, on myself, I'm scared a lot of the time. I'm not always kind of aware of it, but I am. And it also informs my decisions in ways that I can't fully kind of grasp or recognize in the moment. So, when it comes to this situation, again, I won't go too deeply into that, but I do think what's important, what's worth acknowledging is, you know, the way that I react to police is very directed to me being a Black person. And that has an impact for me as a woman in a relationship with a white man. I'll give you an example. So Tim and I, my partner, we used to drive up and down to the Bay Area a lot to see friends. And, it's on the five, it's faster. It's not as scenic, but it gets you there faster, but it's boring. And also it's
Give me an interrupt, but we should tell our viewers that it's this Shatara, I think, is referring to the San Francisco Los Angeles Drive on the five.
yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. That's very important. And so, yeah, it's boring and awful. And, no one likes doing it. And we were doing it a lot. And honestly, I I don't like doing the drive because I'm tense the whole time. And there's always this anxiety that I have that like a cop is gonna pull me over and it's gonna be bad. I'm just being honest. I couldn't articulate that, until I really thought about it, but that's what was going on. And so I always had my partner drive. And at a certain point, he got really fed up with that and he made me drive. So we're driving back down the five, going back towards Los Angeles. We have not, I think we were like out by Livermore, and I see this cop car kind of like following me. I'm going the speed limit. There's no reason for me to be, you know, like nervous. And yet I almost like had a heart attack. I started like panic breathing. I couldn't, I had to like pull over like at the, next exit, and like the cop followed me. Again, I don't think he was focused on me. I think we were just getting off in the same place, but I literally lost it. And this was probably, I don't know, the middle of 2016 when that happened. And like my hands were shaking and I had a full on panic attack, and this cop was not interested in me. And I realized in that moment that like, there was a weird dance that I was kind of doing with Tim to not drive. And I could never really articulate what that was or what it was about. But in that moment, I started to break it down. And so we've had many a fight about not sharing the driving load, on this trip, on many trips like this. And it was only then that I realized what it was about. So when I put that into the context of, my protagonist, when I think about Renisha and I think about her reaction and the way that the choices that she makes as she navigates, this problem, I get how race is involved, but like the dynamics that, are at the surface have more to do with like her also being a woman, her also feeling like, she has to defer in a certain way, she has to play into a certain idea to spare this guy's feelings. And she's not even fully maybe aware of all that other stuff that's kind of informing that. Is that clear? I feel like I talked about a lot
Sure
of things
is.
in one.
Sure is. I have to ask, now, did you inform Tim of what your feelings were on this, and
I did.
what was
I
his
did.
reaction?
He's better now. He gets it.
He's
I
better
don't
now.
drive as much as I used to. Hate to say.
He's better now. And how much? I mean, I suppose I have to ask you how much of your own experience you think you put into the film. I mean, just how personal is it?
I mean, did this exact thing happen to me? No. The
No, no,
crazy.
I'm forgive me. I didn't.
Yeah. No. No. No.
I
No.
didn't mean the specifics of the story. What I meant was, how much of this feeling do you think that you put into the film?
Oh, I mean, I think that's hard to quantify because it's in everything, right? Again, the point of view is fully informed by a person who feels like an alien most of the time, and also experiences. Again, to connect this a little bit back to what I was talking about with Hitchcock, like something I also really love is that, Hitchcock movies can be like one genre and then all of a sudden like flip immediately, and you don't really, it doesn't, there's no signal for it happening, it just kind of happens. And that's kind of how I experience life sometimes. Like, I'll be at a nice restaurant and, enjoying myself with someone I love and it's very romantic, and then all of a sudden it turns into a fucking horror film without me even really having any control of it or even being aware of it, just from the environment, the people who are there, or whatever other kind of confines have like affected how my identity navigates within that. Um,
But
yeah,
Hitchcock is very big with uh, color. His choices with color are very bold. He'll put Kim Novak literally just bathe her in this like emerald green light, and just it won't make any rational sense. But you'll do very similar things. You'll have this kind of almost magenta light, that she's bathing her when she's sitting in a car or something. Very bold choices. Is that would you say that's from the Hitchcock?
yeah,
I'm
absolutely. Or
a big
just like,
fan of Marnie, so I
yeah,
figured I would ask this because he's obviously very bold with color in that film.
yeah. No, I think in general, like I play with color all the time, and it's just another tool and motif that I use to express what's internal. I don't know, this is probably really obvious, but I don't really love dialogue in the sense of like if I can get away with conveying a feeling or an idea without having to spell it out, I'm going to do it. And so color's been really helpful for that. And it's been something that I don't know, I appreciate from like German expressionism. And like I think about like growing up and watching like Douglas Sirk movies and like thinking about how color was used in just like the genre of melodrama. And like, so that was something that I felt like it was a useful tool to help me not have to explain everything verbally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting you mentioned Douglas Sirk, who obviously was very bold in many ways in that respect. Although I've always, it's weird because my favorite Sirk movies are black and white, which I'm not sure I know what that means. Like, there's a bunch. Imitation of Life obviously is color, and I love that movie. But I love There's Always Tomorrow, which is black and white, and Tarnished Angels is black and white. Anyway, but I'm curious to know what the color choices mean to you. In other words, um, they're bold. They're oftentimes it's almost monochromatic. You'll do something where I gave you that example where she's in her car and there's almost like only two colors in the screen. There's black and this kind of strange lavender, light that's hitting her face as she's quite expressive. What does that mean? Like, what is it? I know that it's bold and it has an
Yeah.
emotional reaction, but it's hard for me to put it into words, which I suppose is a good thing. But I want to know what it means to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm right back at you. It's the emotional thing, right? It's like I wish it were more intellectual than that. I really do. I think, some of the colors, there's definitely colors in the film that have strict meanings, right? Like there's a lot of green that you'll see in the film, and green is kind of the color that I assigned for the harmony and cohesion of Evan and Renisha. So when things are good, you see a lot of like lush plants and green walls and stuff like that. And when things aren't, that color's kind of drawn out and more isolated into its other parts. But in terms of like, that scene with the magenta, honestly, it was more like I kept picking colors that like felt something in my gut, honestly. And like if it was if I responded to it the way that I was hoping the audience would respond to it, that's what I went with.
Hmm, hmm. So if I can, even though it's the point of view is very specifically focused on her, what's interesting is this thing where in some respects her boyfriend acts kind of heroically in her situation. He's not a jerk by any stretch.
Mhm.
He sort of does the best he can. Um, and sometimes she's not even that willing to help. So, get out an answer for this situation. Again, I don't want to give it away. And yet, our view of him is always external. In other words, it's always her point of view. I wonder if you could speak to your relationship with his character as well, and what
Yeah.
that means to you.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think, you asked this question earlier about kind of how, the way that she is almost informed by the space that she's in, right? And when Brittany and I sat down and kind of talked about who Renisha was and how Renisha ended up there, and what would make Renisha even open to, dating a guy like Evan? Because clearly the way that they, got together it was obvious that that's not something that she normally does, nor him. And, I definitely wanted there to be kind of like a class imbalance between the two of them. I wanted Renisha to be the one that had the job that paid a lot of money, that gave them the stability, and and had a clear kind of vision and idea for what she wanted, and for him to be kind of more wayward. But I also know that straight men obviously sometimes have issues as they're navigating their own kind of masculinity, and also adhering to the rules of patriarchy. Sometimes they don't necessarily feel good about those things, and so I was trying to put Renisha and Evan in a moment where they could get married at any second, but all Renisha's doing is waiting for Evan to ask the question, and Evan isn't asking the question because he, in his mind, because doesn't really feel like maybe he should, or he's good enough. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of scenes where Renisha's always leaving him. Actually, I think most scenes, if not all of them, I can't remember. I tried to track it, but it was intentional that she was always the one leaving him. And in his mind, he thinks that's what's going on. Like every time Renisha goes out that door, she might not be coming back. So that's the first thing to kind of establish with that. The reason why we're always seeing him out here, I don't know. I mean, it might honestly be petty in the sense of I I'm so tired of being, you know, rendered in cinema and always being the one on the outside. And I thought that maybe just as an experiment, maybe I didn't even think of, now that I think about it, I don't even think I thought about it that intentionally. I only cared about what was really going on in Renisha's head. And that was always going to be the thing that drove it, whether she was, being an active participant in the decisions or not. We're always looking at him. And I guess that's, I don't know what it's like for me. I'm always looking at all these other people who believe that they're the, you know, protagonist and driver of my story effectively. So
Yeah, no, that's actually quite clear and very effective. I only ask because he motivates a lot of the action, and it's unusual, and not a flaw, by the way, but unusual that a person who motivates a lot of the action is the one that we view from an external point of view. So it's quite interesting in that way what you're saying, and it makes total sense. I see completely the sort of class difference element that you're discussing. I'm worried for them. I understand what you're saying, that maybe she's just waiting to be asked to be married, but I don't think that, I don't get the sense necessarily, and I'm not sure why I feel this way, because it's not like the film depicts anything particularly ugly in their relationship at all. In fact, in many ways, it's wonderful. But the film has a lot of dread when it approaches their relationship, um, and I guess I wonder why I feel that way, given that it's not really justified by any narrative events in the story. I don't know. Maybe you could speak to that a little.
yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe who
No,
knows?
I don't think you're wrong. And now I'm wondering if that's again one of those weird uh flaws of not being as kind of objective as I wanted to be. Because clearly I don't believe that they're doing okay and that they'll make it. Um the actors, by the way, one thinks so and one doesn't, which I thought was interesting. Um,
Well, you got to tell us who. I,
uh, Brittany believed that they were going to be fine. Will believed that they weren't.
well, that's what I would have guessed. It sort of
Yeah.
plays that way in the film in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and honestly, so what I did in that final scene, I had kind of like a vague idea of like how I was going to frame it or what it was going to look like. But I kind of left it open because I wanted to ask them before I got to that point and like finally kind of like said it finally. Like I was like kind of, I just went by and I was like, hey, so we good or no? Are they making it? They're not making it. And Will was like, no. I was like, cool, great. And I go over to Brittany and she's like, yeah, it's gonna be fine. I was like, sure, okay, good. And then that made, I had to kind of like sit down with Ludovica and think about it again, because I was like, okay, these are two different people who are completely different planes on what actually is going on right now, which does not, in my mind, bode well. So I was kind of like, we need to find a way to kind of represent that they're in two very different places, although they occupy similar space. Um, so yeah, no, I don't think it goes well, but maybe that's also, I don't think it's gonna sound whatever. I don't think that it serves us, um, in America especially, to not talk about things that are so obviously racialized or so obviously gendered, to not acknowledge power dynamics. Um, I think I think that's deeply problematic. And I think in any relationship, when that's not being acknowledged, that it's doomed a little bit, unless, people are secretly, are tacitly agreeing to things without really directly having the conversation. But even then, I think there's some problems. So I think that's my own judgment, unfortunately, that's kind of seeped through, that lays that kind of final, um, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I don't disagree with anything you said, although it's interesting because really across all metrics, interracial couples do way better actually than than so it's in rates of divorce much lower, for example.
Hmm.
Combined income generally much higher than average Americans. Very strange.
I think you're forced to talk about it though. I mean, I have friends who are Black and in relationships with white folks, and they don't talk about stuff. Even after 2016, they don't talk about stuff. I find that perplexing. But I do think in general, you're forced to kind of address things. You just have to. And maybe because of that, things work out. But I
Right.
think, in Evan's case, he doesn't like talking about things. He's very avoidant. And I think that, that's one of the reasons why perhaps this relationship is so shaky at the moment. The scene when they come home and she's literally just standing in the living room waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge something, and he can't do it, and she storms off again. It's like she's daring him to say, maybe we could have done this differently, or I'm sorry
Right.
for that.
Well, I had a feeling when I saw that scene, Shatara, my reaction was sort of like, I have sympathy for him though, because you kind of can't ask, a chimpanzee to talk about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like he in
Yeah,
some ways is quite, uh, he's, his it's not to say he's certainly not a ridiculous, stupid person, not worthy, which I think is a sort of mistake to put that in character terms anywhere about anybody in a movie. But he is a very sensitive person in many respects, but he doesn't have. You get the sense he doesn't have the tools to do that,
exactly.
and to ask him to do that would be, like I said, like asking a dolphin to start playing Sousa marches. It's just not. In the it's not in the skill set, you know?
You're exactly right. And it's unfair of her. Again, why the relationship's kind of off in all these ways, right? She's expecting things that he can't necessarily meet, that he's going to have to grow to
Yeah.
arrive at.
But she's very sympathetic too, right? Because because he can't provide it, it doesn't mean that she doesn't need it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Tragic. It's
yeah,
deeply tragic.
yeah. No, I totally get what you're going for. Uh, I have to ask this sort of pedestrian question, but it's something
Mhm.
that I'm sure a lot of listeners want to know as well, which is, how this is your first feature. Like, how was that? I mean, what was the word? What was challenging to you in a way that you didn't anticipate? And is there a joy to it that you didn't anticipate?
I have two stories. They both include you. Story number one. So, obviously, you knew when I came to work for you that I wanted to be a director. You knew that. We were cool with that. We talked about that. I remember often, when days were hard for you, and I'm oblivious because I don't know. I'm just sitting there like happy to be there. You would just be like, "Are you sure you want to do this? This is so hard. Are you sure you want to do this?" You would ask me, I'm like, is he joking with me? Is he, and I'd be like, this is a lovely day. Like, I don't know what he's talking about. So that's the first thing. The second thing
I'm
I think,
sorry that I ever dissuaded you.
no, you never did. Not like it wasn't dissuading. You were checking, like you were actually just sharing with me, like, this is hard. And I couldn't even recognize, like, I thought you were making jokes all the time. I couldn't even recognize like what you were saying, that this is very hard work. Like there's gonna be days that are just really difficult. And like that happens, right? Like there's days where I would go into set, which is also a joy, but like really stressful. And I'm just not sure like what to do. Like I've planned it out, I've done all the things, I've done all the prep, and I'm there and I'm just like, I don't know. Um, and you know, so you have that day, and let's say one catastrophe happens, which of course there are many, and then I'm on just like in an indie film where we're all doing more than one job, so catastrophes are happening all the time. And then let's add the second thing, or the second story, which also relates to this kind of, collection of stuff. But let's say the catastrophe happens and it's your literal money that's at stake. So, I took out 7 credit cards just to kind of get me over the line, to just buy the equipment, feed people, get them accommodation, get them on a plane, all of that kind of stuff. Um, and I honestly would have to say, like, it's already hard enough sometimes when you're just on the set and you're just trying to figure out how to get it from point A to point B, get it to work. It's really tricky. You don't have that much time. You don't have that much time in the space. And also you're watching your money like disappear, like explode in front of you, because of catastrophes that you couldn't control. That's really, 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 really hard. And there was so much for me to like, it was hard for me to separate that, and I found myself sometimes making choices that served saving money as opposed to serving the story. And that is a terrible place to be in, because I'm just so aware of it in a way that, like, it just wouldn't hurt as much if it weren't literally mine. So I think that clouds things sometimes. Like I'll give you an example. The scene when they're um, on their first date in that restaurant. We had like 2 hours. It was already like 3 in the morning. We had to like we had to go to the grocery store next. And, we just had so many like weird scheduling shifts that were happening. And like, honestly, I needed more time. And to get more time, I was going to buy that time. I couldn't technically afford that time, but I really needed that time because I had something else in my head for what I wanted that day. It doesn't matter. I got what I needed to get, but that was really, really hard. And in a way that, like, I wish sometimes I didn't have to have that added, element, if that makes sense.
Oh, of course it makes sense. Well, I'm sorry to have to cut this off now. I've found this most illuminating. I have one in a long line of Zooms coming up. I'm sure everybody understands this. So Zoom fatigue, right? I hope that you don't have a Zoom after this. But I wish you the best with it. It's a wonderful movie, and I've loved seeing you uh, mature into this artist, and it's really a great thing. And I probably sounds ridiculously patronizing, which of course I didn't mean at all. I'm old. I get to say patronizing things when you get old. Uh, it's really a lovely thing. And anyway, I don't know if the viewers have seen the film yet. If they haven't, they should. And if they've seen it already, then they know what I'm talking about. But thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See ya.